Thank you very much, Gordon. And we're now going to open it up for questions. So you can either ask a question through chat, or you can raise your hand. And again, by raising your hand, you go to reactions, click on reaction and raise your hand, and I'll call upon you. But I'm looking at the questions in chat, and okay, so one question is, given the net health study that I identified in California and in Chile, is there any evidence that other insects other than honeybee or bumblebee contribute significantly to avocado pollination? I think what Gordon has shown is that we have the potential that there are other insects, but it's just from a commercial perspective, you can go out and buy honeybee. I mean, you can rent honeybee hives, you can buy bumblebees. And so from that perspective, you can manipulate those a little bit more. But I think understanding what you have in your grove from what is available in the natural environment is also very important. And we shouldn't discount the fact that those insects may also be contributing to pollination. We have a question from Olivia. Does a website include the photos and the variety of pollinators you talked about? I guess that's to Gordon.
Yes, and also if we know that people have a particular interest in seeing more of our images, we're happy to share those. We have a fantastic world-class photographer who does the macro photography, and we have photographs of almost every one of the insects that I talked about, and especially the bees. So we also have a book called The California Bees and Blooms, where a lot of these insects are also very nicely seen in color. By Heyday Books, in 2014, we published a book, and we're happy to share results with people. We're UC Berkeley, and we're very much into extension work as well as with research work. And I might also mention that another one of our colleagues who had that works with us is Dr. Ben Faber at the Ventura Office of UC Cooperative Extension, and he also has access to a lot of our images.
So I think a couple more questions for you, Gordon. One is, have you actually, similar to what Rafi Stern presented, do you have data that shows that you have higher yield on trees closest to the habitat gardens versus going further away?
We don't have that kind of information because that was never one of our goals that we set out. We started with the idea, USDA came to us in 2009 and said, tell us something about these native pollinators, and should we know something about them in light of the fact that we're losing honeybees around the world? That was our incentive for getting started with this kind of work. So we haven't correlated this with the production of fruit. There's one other aspect I should also mention here, that that we are also in a very severe drought period right now. But even though the drought is ongoing, we're still getting bee activity and other insect activity on the avocado flowers. So this is one of the things that we should do in the future. We haven't done it yet. Great.
Well, maybe this is a question for Rafi. John Cornell is asking if we replicated, should we replicate the net house study using bumblebees?
I didn't understand the question. What?
The question would be is, you know that I presented the data that we did with these net houses, both in California and Chile. So the question is, would that be useful to also do with bumblebees?
Inside the net?
Yeah.
Yes, of course, because we found that the honeybee inside the net work not so good like bumblebee. Bumblebee can work very, very good inside the nets. We are doing a lot of experiment with nets, and we actually throw out the honeybee and we introduce only bumblebee under the nets. Not only on avocado, also on lychee and also on apple, because I think that honeybee inside the nets, also like we have in the glass house, something happened to them. I don't know, maybe because they don't see the sun, or maybe the reflection of the light is something happened to them, but the bumblebee doesn't care. They still work very, very good, very hard. And I think it's a very good idea to introduce bumblebee into the nets and to look what's going on. My experiments today to check the best pollinizer for lychee, for example, or for avocado, I'm taking 2 trees with nets and with bumblebee hive, not honeybee, only bumblebee hives. I don't know if I explained the right question that you asked.
No, I mean, I think you're telling us that we should do that. That's great. We have a question about what is the best pollinizer for Maluma. I would say we don't have that answer, unfortunately. In South Africa, they don't really believe in pollinizer varieties. They don't use them to a large extent. And in all the Maluma groves I've looked at, they've been interplanted with other varieties. But no one's just looked at what is a good pollinizer variety for Maluma. Maluma has a flower that's very similar to Hass. It flowers about the same time as Hass. So any pollinizer variety that would bloom at about the same time as Hass would probably work for Maluma. So here's a question for Arnon. What is the optimum number of hives per acre for honeybees?
For honeybees?
Yeah,
for
that's
avocado.
for avocado or Arnon.
I don't know if the same in California, but in Israel, we are usually we are putting we put five honeybee per hectare. 5 honeybee per hectare. We try to put much more, 10 hive per hectare, but we didn't receive better yield because what Arnon said, that the honeybee is not going so good to the avocado, especially to the Hass. It's not attractive at all. So even if you put more hives, it's not work. For my experience, 4 years of experience, I didn't receive better yield when I put more than 5 honeybee hives. I did it also on apple trees. On apple trees, I found that when I put more hives, at the beginning it was 2.5 honeybee hive per hectare. And now we found that the best is 5 honeybee hive per hectare. But in avocado, usually in Israel, the commercial orchard put something like 5 per hectare, not more. It's not work. It's not give you a better result. You need something else, something different, some pollinators that are coming and doing the work.
Arnon, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated situation because the last year, the profitability of the avocado grove was relatively high. And the grower many times think, and they're right, that if they bring more hive, and especially when we have competition issue, if they will bring more hive, they will have higher pollination. So the hive density increase. They start with 2 hive per hectare, and now they're speaking sometime about 10 hive per hectare. But the number of beehive in Israel is limited. So we are approaching a situation that we will not have enough beehive to place in the avocado orchard in parallel to the apple orchard that bloom in the same time. This is one angle of the story. Another angle of the story, that when they increase the density of the hive, the honey yield from the beekeeper point of view is going down sharply because there are many beehive in very small, in relatively small area. So the beekeeper try to convince, it's very strange situation. The beekeeper try to convince the avocado grower not to order too much beehive because they know that they will not have honey. So generally it's going between 10 hive per hectare or up to 3 hive per hectare. And it depends in the different area, especially in accordance to competition. And another point to mention, and it's following Rafi studies in apple and pear and plum, is that they bring the beehive, some of them at least, in several times. Not all of them at one time, but several times during the blooming time. It's increased the mobility of the bee between cultivar and reduce the impact of competition.
Thank you, Arnon. I think we'll go to Greg. He has his hand raised. He's been very patient. Greg?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mary Lou. This is a question for Gordon. I noticed that, well, first of all, in your book, California Bees and Blooms, you recommend that pollinator patches or bee gardens be wide, kind of large, wide patches rather than small or narrow patches. But you planted more of the hedgerow style in those gardens you showed. Are those as effective as large patches, or do you have any idea, or did you just plant in that way because it's easier to maintain in those situations?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that question because it comes up. If you notice the our bee book from Heyday, the focus was on urban gardens. So urban gardens come in all sizes and shapes. Some are large, some are small. And whenever we have a chance to talk to urban gardeners, we always say, plant as much as you can and fill the spaces that you have. So that's one aspect of habitat gardening. The other is hedgerows are much more convenient in agricultural systems, and they've been used widely in agricultural systems. So we just follow the path that others have already done, and we use these hedgerows, and they're not very wide, and they're very easy to monitor as well. So that's the difference between the two types of uses, urban versus agricultural.
Thank you, Gordon. We'll go on some more questions. A question for you, Gordon. We have a question. Did you compare avocado pollen load between native and managed pollinators?
We wanted to do that, and we actually had a grant proposal into USDA to do that, and we weren't successful with that particular effort. So we still have that to do. We still have a lot of things to do with regard to analyzing pollen loads of all of the visitors that we've encountered on avocado flowers. So that's work to be done.
Thanks, Gordon. We have another question here. I'll just read it. Many California growers have honeybees visiting their trees from adjacent groves hosting honeybees. Does it make more sense for a grower to get their own honeybees as well, or would cultivating bumblebees on their groves make more sense to supplement the already present honeybees? So I think that's probably a question for both Arnon and Rafi.
Arnon, what do you say?
Again, the question is whether the avocado grower will be the beekeeper also?
Well, no, you can rent bees, but the question is really, should I take advantage of my neighbor bringing bees in and hope their bees go into my grove, or should I actually actively bring bees and or bumblebees into my own grove?
No, you need actively to bring the hive to the orchard. Do not ask for favors and do not count on your neighbors. There is a strong reduction in the bee activity in accordance to the distance from the hive. So yeah, it's important to bring the beehive to your location. I'm wondering regarding the availability of bumblebee colony, can the grower in California rent bumblebee colony for the orchard?
I know you can get bumblebees, but I don't know the details of getting bumblebees. So
I completely agree with Arnon about the introduction of a honeybee to the orchard. I saw it not only in apple and pears, I saw it also in lychee and avocado, that if you are not bringing the honeybee hive to your own orchard, you don't receive the yield that you can have when they are inside your orchard. It's very, very, very important.
okay, so we have a sort of a follow-up question. It was like, if you had to pick one or the other, is it honeybees or honeybees alone better than bumblebees alone, or should we have a combination of both?
Bumblebee alone, I'm not sure that we can do it. I never did it before. I don't think the grower are brave enough to do it. But the combination, I think it's very good. We found in apple trees, on apple orchard, that the synergism between the bumblebee as a honeybee is excellent. There's no any antagonism. There is a synergism between both of them. And the bumblebee make the honeybee work better, more quickly and more effective than they are alone. I don't have time to explain why and how, but it's work. It's not only that they are working very early in the morning and very good in a very cloudy weather and so on, but they make the honeybee working much, much better, much quicker, much effective. And I don't know exactly what's happened on the avocado orchard because I don't have enough experience and time to learn it, but I will learn it very close. But the combination between both of them, I think is something very good. And even you have to remember what Arnon said, that the honeybee hives are limited. We don't have enough of them, at least in Israel. I think in California, you have also the same problem.
Great. So we have a lot of questions on the chat. I'm just sort of scrolling. Well, here's a great one because in California, we have companies that sell Zutano pollen for artificial pollination. So either they put the pollen at the entrance of the beehive, or this question is, using drones to apply pollen. What are your opinions of not having the bumblebee or the honeybee or any other little insect that like the hoverflies or the sweat bee, actually actively collecting the pollen and distributing the pollen on their bodies versus introducing artificial pollen into the grove? I mean, not artificial, but pollen from another source.
Artificial pollination now, it's becoming more and more in the orchard. I know that in Israel we are doing, not myself, but I know the company, two companies in Israel that are working on it. They started on almond, and now one company started on avocado, and it's work, but it depends how is the calculation of this, because it's quite expensive till now. But when they proved that when they are doing it and they improve the pollination, they receive much more yield. But it's the only problem is the cost of it. How many shekel dollars you have to spend on this idea, but it works. It means that we have a limitation with pollination, limit of pollination on avocado, especially on Hass.
Arnon, do you have a comment on that?
I think artificial pollination is relatively easy in wind-pollinated crops like pistachio and olive. It's also work with rosaceae crop like almond and plum, because it's relatively easy to extract the pollen and spread it. I think with avocado it's a little bit more challenging because the pollen grain are relatively sticky, and to collect a large amount and to spread it, I think it will be a big challenge. But I don't know, the technology is running forward very fast, so maybe a few years. I don't know currently that there is something that works in avocado, but maybe there is.
Okay, so I mean, because I've always wondered, because avocados flower over a very long period of time, the stigma is only receptive for a certain amount of hours. And so my question has always been, when we've introduced pollen from other places, is first of all, how long is that pollen viable for? And number two is, how do we maximize getting that pollen to the stigma when it's receptive?
Yeah.
So let's see, we have a quick question about using Forte as a pollinizer. I would only say if you go into the old Avocado Society yearbooks, You'll see when Forte was a dominant variety in California, that it was mentioned that Hass could be a pollinizer variety for Forte. So Forte is a bee flower type. It could be used as a pollinizer. In fact, we had a trial in Oxnard many years ago, and Forte was one of the pollinizers we looked at, and we had very good yields of Hass next to Forte. Let me scroll down here. We have a question here. Has anyone studied yields in a grove in trees adjacent to wildlands versus trees in the interior of a grove? So that goes back to what Gordon was talking about, is if you're near an area where there's a lot of wildflowers, can you see a reduction in yield as you move further into the grove away from the wild area?
Would you like me to comment on that? Miriam?
Sure. Sure,
Okay.
that'd be great, Gordon.
Well, one of the things that we've determined with our work is that, in contrast to bumblebees and maybe something with honeybees as well, a lot of these native visitors that we call pollinators or good visitors that probably are pollinating avocado, is they're widely distributed throughout the entire orchard, not simply adjacent to or close by to the hedgerow garden, but they're widely distributed. So these things get around, and we're really happy to know that this diversity is out there. And it's a matter of encouraging the habitats that also encourage the native visitors overall. So we think we have some growers now that want to plant a series of hedgerow gardens throughout their orchards, which we think is a good step in the right direction. And we've actually been helping them do that. The line of plants that I showed you is only one of 6 gardens that are in this particular orchard, which is the Thill Ranch. And that was brought on by the grower. They wanted to see more action by the native plants that are pulling in these insects. And they wanted to help the native insects more by providing them with the plants that they like. So that's what we're focusing on, those kinds of relationships. And we think that because a lot of these visitors have a wide range of dispersal, that they're probably very good at supplementing the honeybees. And that was one of the original objectives of USDA. They said, well, why don't you find out if these native visitors can supplement honeybees? And that was one of our incentives for doing the work that we're doing. But the main point I'm getting at here is that the wild insects that are also visiting the avocado flowers are widely distributed throughout the orchards. But we think we can actually enhance the quantities and diversity by planting the kind of plants that we've been developing, or the relationships that we've been developing for establishing those types of gardens.
Thanks, Gordon. Ohanas, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, my question is both to Chris and to Armin. One of the issues that I have is when the beekeepers deliver the beehives, they normally like to put them as close to the road as possible for them to access, to feed the bees and to maintain the hives. And when they put it, it's on the corner of a 20-acre parcel. What's the benefit of those bees going backwards to the far end of the parcel where the trees are? Would they travel? I mean, I know they are limited in the distance that they travel. So how effective is that going to be for me?
Generally, when we recommend, at least here in Israel, recommend the grower how to place the hive in the orchard, we tell them that they will not have trees in a distance higher than 150 meters from the beehive. So they need to place the hive all around the orchard and sometimes place them inside the orchard, because after 150 meters, again, in general, like Rafi has shown with the bumblebee, the same story with honeybees, there is gradient. The honeybee can fly large distances, but you know, there is kind of dilution effect because it's circles that going and bigger and bigger and bigger. So generally, not more than 150 meters from the hive, the tree in the highest distance. If the beekeeper
that's-
insists to place the hive only on the corner of the orchard, I think you might consider looking for other beekeepers.
Yeah, it's very hard to find beekeepers that will do that for you. I haven't, over the 22 years been growing avocados, I haven't been able to find a beekeeper that is willing to do that.
But you pay
Yeah.
them?
Oh, yeah, you know. And,
But
they-
it's
they-
business if you pay them. well,
Yeah, but the problem is that they have to take care of the hives. They come in the middle of the night for them to drive throughout the grove to feed the hives and take care of the hives. They just won't do it.
No, they must have accessibility to the hive, that's for sure. The question is whether you have roads that going around the orchard and inside the orchard. They cannot take them by their hand, of course.
Yeah, we have groves in the orchard, but the problem is at night, they come with big trucks. And they have employees and they have forklifts and all that to move things around. And, you know, it's kind of risky for them to get inside the grove at night. There is not enough lighting. The roads may not be in the best condition. So it's very difficult.
I worked for several years with an almond grower in pollination in California. They put every location, they put 10 hive or 8 hive or even 4 hive all around and inside and outside. I think, I don't know. It's
Yeah,
matter
most of those-
negotiation.
Most of those almond groves are on flat land. So it's easy for that to
Okay.
work out, so. Not so in avocado groves. Thank you.
Mary Lou, you're muted.
Sorry. So I have a couple of questions that were sent to me by email. So I'll ask one of those right now. The role of magnetic charge in pollen collection and sigma receptivity. Is there a variation in the charge of the sigma at different times of the day? Can any of you answer that one?
I don't know, but I just know that it depends on the temperature. That I know. That it's not. It doesn't matter if it's the morning or noon or afternoon. If the temperature is higher than 50 degrees, then the pollination and the fertilization process will be very quickly. But if it's low temperature, then it stops. The pollination process will stop, and it can continue the day after if the temperature will come higher again.
Yeah, but I
But-
think the question here is that the sigma has a, if I remember right, a positive charge and the pollen grains are negative or the reverse. And that's how the pollen grains initially adhere to the sigma. And so I think, do you have any data on that or no?
Again, it's more relevant for wind pollinated crops. I spoke before this meeting, I spoke with a company in Israel that doing electrostatic pollination. And they told me they think maybe to work on avocado, but until now they do not have any real data. So it might play some role, but not something significant, I believe.
Okay. Another question that was emailed was when the new honeybee workers first go out, how far do they, I guess the question is every time they go out, do they fly a little bit further? So do they stick close to the hive initially and then they go further and further? Is that how the
Exactly.
behavior works?
Exactly. Young bee, when they fly out for the first time, they scout around the hive at the beginning, few tens meter, and then the distance is
Thanks for
going
coming.
bigger and bigger and higher and higher. Yeah, so this allows
So
them to
this
learn
morning when
the
I
environment.
walked out, I could hear the furnace running and it was not
Denise, can
turned
you
on
mute
the
yourself,
unit on the
please?
wall. So I went up,
Denise, can you mute yourself, please?
so sorry.
Sorry, Arnon.
Yeah, so This is right. At the beginning, young bee tend to forage near the hive, and with the time, it's expanded.
We have it's sort of along those lines. There is a new research on mechanical pollination in apple and sweet cherries using microspray with charged solution to achieve the stigma using very little amount of product. Do either one of you has anybody done that work on avocado?
I had a meeting this morning with Matthew from Washington, from Prosser, that work on this topic. And again, it's different story. I believe it will be much more complicated in avocado in comparison to crop from the Rosaceae family, but maybe in the future.
Very good. Let me see, I'm looking at, here's another question. Given the inconsistencies in the study between the New World Carniolan and its races and the Italian races in Israel, overall, what race of honeybees would be best to pollinate avocados in California?
It's not inconsistency, it's a matter of environment. And I think also in California, it would be better for each environment, for each region to evaluate different strains of honeybee. And I believe you will have some consistency in each region. But you need to test it. And again, the way to test it is not so complicated. You can harvest the honey separately from those hive and those hive and see the level of Persiatol, or even see the color of the honey, because avocado honey always is much darker than other honeys. So prefer the honeybee strain with the darker honey.
Very, very good. We have a question for Rafi. Has any work been done to compare bumblebees to carpenter bees that are used in passion fruit pollination?
I don't know anything about the passion fruits. I know that Gadi Sham works many years ago on passion fruit, but I don't know if he worked with bumblebee or honeybee. I don't know.
Okay. Let's see. I'm looking at all these questions. See what other questions we have here. Here's a question for Gordon. What's the approximate spacing of hedgerow gardens at the Phil Ranch, and what would you recommend for spacing?
Well, that's a good question. I think we're at a stage now where we're asking that same question. It has a lot to do with the grower and what the grower allows us in terms of space. We have so far only used edges and corners of the orchard that are not being used for anything else. So it's not something that we can address very easily. But it's a sort of thing that you have to work out individually with the grower. Some growers say, I'll find all the spaces you need. Other growers are saying, well, you can have this space over here, but not that one. So it's an individual sort of thing. And this, again, comes down to our relationship with the growers as to what they will want us to do in terms of the knowledge that we have.
Thanks, Gordon. Going back to the work that you did on avocado pollination, or now the question is, does any pollinizer variety contain more or less Persiatol in the nectar? If less, do the bees visit these flowers more frequently and in greater numbers? Do you have that answer?
Yes, we evaluate the effect of Persiatol content on attractiveness for honeybee. And we found that the bee does not respond to Persiatol in either way. It's do not repel them and it's not attract them. So the level of Persiatol in the cultivar do not affect the attractiveness of the nectar.
So it's really the potassium content?
If there is a difference in potassium content between cultivar, I don't know. We don't. One of the problem is that it's extremely difficult to collect nectar from Hass flower because they have a very small amount of nectar. So it's relatively difficult. We believe that the reason for better preference of bee to Ettinger is the amount of nectar and not so much the concentration of potassium.
But this is a very, very good subject to research on it. It's very
Well,
interesting
maybe
for me
that's
to
what we
know.
need to do. We need to submit a BARD proposal because more and more growers in California are growing gem. Gem seems to have higher yield. Is it then a question that the flowers are more attractive and it just sets more fruit? Or is it the fact that there's some other basis for that?
It might be, and it's relatively easy to assess this.
Yeah, well, that's a really great idea. Thank you.
Quickly on that, Mary Lou, I
Yes,
think there's some work out of South Africa. I don't know if it's published yet, but I think they actually implicate volatiles. So the attractiveness is probably not just visual, but there are also volatile compounds which may be related to the high potassium levels that you're seeing in Hass that are somehow not very attractive to the bees.
it could be because you're 100% right. There's certain cultivars. We don't normally think of avocados of having a scent like citrus, but there are certain cultivars. When you walk by the tree, when they're in full bloom, you can smell them and there's a very distinct smell. There's one variety that we have in our tier 3 collection down in Irvine is that way. It's has a distinct fragrance to it when you walk by. And it's not that anise smell that we normally associate with Mexican race avocados. It's a very sort of sweet, I can't describe the flavor. And then there's a variety from South Africa that we have under a test agreement. And that one has gigantic flowers, lots of nectar, and definitely you can smell the flower. So you're right, there are probably differences. John, thank you for that comment. Let's see, we have one more, let's see. All right, here's a long question. This is for Gordon. Since we know that there's a synergy between the bumblebee and honeybee, are there things growers can do to significantly increase bumblebee concentrations in their orchards? Do you think that creating a natural habitat is better than bringing in your own bumblebee hives to manage?
Well, that's a really good question. We try to encourage bumblebees to come in with the plants that we choose that we know that they like, but I've never worked with bumblebee hives, so I don't know. I can't answer that question fully.
I think David Pettermore in New Zealand have done a big study on this, and they supply not food resources, but nesting resources for the bumblebee. And I think they succeeded to increase the population of bumblebee in the orchards.
That's very good. I guess the other thing would be is, Rafi, maybe you can answer this.
I can answer something, and I don't know if it answers the question, but I found something very interesting on Kfar Giladi. This is one place that I made a 5 years experiment, and this year, as the first time, the control plot was not control anymore. Why? Because the control was full of bumblebee. Where it's come from? I think it's come from the native area around the orchard, because 5 years of introduce a bumblebee hive to the orchard maybe increase the bumblebee around the orchard in the native, and they slowly become to the orchards, and so I don't have any control. So maybe it's answer a little bit the question that slowly the bumblebee in Israel it's growing. I don't know if it's because of the weather change. I don't know if because we brought more and more hives to the orchard. I don't know the reason, but I think we can see also in our garden, in our houses, we see much more bumblebee now in our nature, in our garden than before. Much more. I never see so much bumblebee. It was once in a week I could see on my flower in my garden one bumblebee, but now a lot of bumblebee, and maybe they come from my avocado orchard. It's 1 kilometer from my house, and we put about 5 years bumblebee hives on the avocado, and now I can see them quite a lot. So something changed, something happened. You can bring, you can increase the population of the nature bumblebee, and they come inside the orchard. I think it will take time, but this is happened now.
So I have a mechanistic question. So I know with honeybees, you maintain the hives year round and then you just bring the hive back. I mean, you have to renew the hives, but on bumblebees, can you maintain them year round, or do you have to
No,
buy
no.
a new nest of honeybees every year?
Their life is about 6 weeks. It depends on the weather, but it can be between 4 weeks and 6 weeks, that's all. And then it collapses, then it's finished. So it's good for one season. Then every season you can use it sometime in twice, in two things. For example, you can put it on the almond orchard because it's the beginning, it's very early, it's during February, and then you can continue, you can move them to the pear orchard, or from the pear orchard to the cherry orchard. We can use it twice, but it's not more than 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, it collapsed, it's finished. It's not like the honeybee that you can continue all over the year.
Let's see, we have one last question because we've reached the magic hour at 10 o'clock. This question is for Gordon. Do anything specific to create nesting habitat near the hedgerow gardens? What do you do?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. We get that question all the time. I think the first thing to recognize is that almost all of 70% of our California bees, native bees, are ground nesters. So that automatically means that you have to be able to find these nests in the ground. Hardly anybody has any real solutions for taking advantage of ground nesting and what we can do to help it. There are a few studies that indicate on certain species that we can actually depend on, but in terms of the other cavity nesting bees, we've used trap nests and we've used bee hotels. And if they're used properly, you can increase the number of bees nesting if you know what you're doing with the use of these bee hotels. So we have done that sort of thing, but much more needs to be done. We had a big grant proposal before California, trying to get a study going on that aspect of increasing the native bee populations, but it wasn't funded. I don't think people really understood how important the cavity nesters really are, because every time we survey old stone fruit orchards, we find that there's an increase in the number of native bees that use these hotels, and they also show up on the flowers in the stone fruit. So we think there's a lot of possibilities for using bee hotels in the future if they're done right. Ground nesting is something we simply don't have a good feeling for, because they spread these nests out widely throughout the areas.
Thank you, Gordon. I don't see any more questions right now. So I think that we've reached the end of the meeting. I want to thank everybody for participating. We will have a meeting in April again. David Crowley is going to be the speaker, and we'll have we'll be sending out an email. Don't forget now that we have a YouTube channel. So if you want to look at the videos, these videos will be available probably within a week. You can also look at the videos on Avocado Source. And in particular for this meeting, Avocado Source has listed, posted also a lot of additional information. I hope that Arnon and Rafi, if you can send me a PDF file of your presentations, then we will also include that on Avocado Source. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody for attending, and hopefully we'll see you in about a month.